This is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this idea that Black Lives Matter is a hate group. For me to talk about this effectively, I actually have to go back a little bit. I want to take you. Let's talk about something that happened hundreds of years ago. So, 1517. Stick with me. 1517. Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses on the doors of the All Saints Church in Germany. Now, inside of this thesis was a direct criticism of the power structure that was the Catholic Church. And in many ways, Martin Luther was fighting against the religious oppression of the Catholic Church. One of the most powerful things that he wrote was not in the document itself, but in the fact that he translated the Bible into being a common language Bible. And it gave the common person the ability to read the Bible for themselves, as well as using this new permission that the 95 Theses granted them, the ability to interpret the Bible for themselves. And this empowered an entire several generations of people to begin to read and interpret the Bible for themselves. This was heresy. This was complete heresy in terms of the Catholic Church, because there was so much control that they had over the ability. And in this day, this was information, right? They had control over the dissemination and the interpretation of information. And Martin Luther came along and said, no, this is not how we're going to do it. The way we're going to do it is everyone gets the chance to read this information for themselves. Everyone gets a chance to interpret this information for themselves. As a result of that freedom, there ensued a series of rebellions from the common man. Mass violence erupted. Violence that led to the deaths of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, ultimately leading to a war that divided. It was directly connected to this revelation on information and actually this liberalization of information. It directly led to extreme violence that he was then called upon to condemn. From two different groups, the Catholic Church looked at him and wanted him to renounce his teachings, right? And use this violence as a justification to say, this is why the common person cannot get their hands on this type of information. This is why the common person needs the powers that be to control the information and to interpret the information for them. And not only the Catholic Church, but the people who are the direct beneficiaries of the 95 Theses, the German aristocracy, they also wanted him to renounce this violence that came from the common man that ultimately was connected to this liberation that Martin Luther gave them. All right, fast forward 499 years. Fast forward to another Martin Luther King, who wasn't fighting against a religious oppression so much as racial oppression and political and economic oppression. And in the midst of Martin Luther King leading this new revolution, King was also looked at to be responsible for every little bit of violence and large violence that ensued from people who probably had a different view of the world anyway, because they would rather go with the violent means versus Dr. King's nonviolent means. But that didn't matter. It didn't matter that Dr. King stated that I am nonviolent and I am for nonviolence and I stand against violence. It didn't matter. People still wanted to hold him accountable for all of the violence that ensued during the unrest in the 60s. And if you take a look at some of the hate mail that Dr. King got, it is eerily similar to some of the same things that we see today. In this letter that was addressed to him in the 60s, it highlighted saying that I'm doing what I think every responsible citizen of the nation should do, protesting to you because of your incitement of the Negroes to conduct threatening the peace and safety of the nation, which, whether it is fully responsible, it is with any group which can be connected, essentially saying that you are, whether directly responsible, you are still responsible for all of the violent unrest that ensued because you dare to get out there and say that we must change this system. Again, the people who benefit from power, as well as the people in power, trying to use civil unrest as a way of silencing a revolution. We saw it with the Reformation, with Martin Luther. We see it now. We saw it in the 60s with Dr. King and the civil rights movement, and even some more of the letters, actually, before I move too quickly. Dr. King, another letter, they use some of the same exact tactics that they use today. How can you be a minister, one letter says, and have such hatred in your heart for the white race and the nation in general? Dr. King was viewed as a leader of a hate group. Dr. King was viewed as a person that, because he stepped out and said that we must fight against this systemic oppression and this racism and segregation and the economic oppression, then because I have the nerve to say that these things are important, now the rest of the world and the powers that be and those who benefit from power are saying to me that I hate the country. But it doesn't stop there. They use the same exact MO that they use today. History doesn't repeat itself. It actually rhymes. Here's a letter addressed on July 11th, 1966. The most important part is highlighted on your screen. Los Angeles, Des Moines, Omaha, Chicago, and Cleveland are in Mississippi, the Deep South. What about the violence by blacks in these cities? So in other words, you're responsible for all the violence. Saying that we should stop oppressing you means that you hate America. And then what about the black on black crime? This is literally the same terminology that is being used today. And so starting off, I mean, this is a tactic that has been used historically. This is a tactic that has always been employed by people who are directly in power and those who benefit from that power. They want to use the violent unrest as a means of silencing legitimate revolution, legitimate change. And so fast forward to today, Black Lives Matter, even though it has expressly stated that it is a peaceful movement, they still use the same exact tactics that they've done historically to say that if there's any violence whatsoever, because you have the nerve to step out and stand up and stand against the power structure, you are therefore responsible for it. Even if not directly, you are indirectly responsible for it. Therefore, you are a hate group. And if you're not a hate group, then surely you just hate America. You hate white people and you hate America, because saying Black Lives Matter automatically means that you don't think that all lives matter. And so we're going to say all lives matter and blue lives matter just to remind you that black lives don't matter because you hate white people. This is the logic that they use. And then if not that, then they want to use, well, black on black crime. What about that? Focus on black crime. Well, let's talk about the black on black crime that I've talked about ad nauseum. First of all, we do fight against black on black crime. There are organizations in every community that are fighting against the violence in our communities, yet and still black on black crime is not far more significant rather than white on white crime. Black on black crime, blacks kill black people at about 93% of rate. White on white crime, white murders are committed by white people 84% of the time. And the numbers are very consistent across demographics, which speaks to the fact, as I said last week, that this is a result of our communities being extremely segregated. If you are going to be killed, you are more likely to be killed by somebody you know. But I'm not here to argue about that. I'm here to highlight the fact that they've done it throughout history. They will always use any means possible to silence dissent, to silence people who are trying to change the world, silence people who are trying to break the power structure, the people that control the reins of power, the people who control the flow of information, the people who have the ability to do the oppression. They will use everything they possibly can to silence. They will even use dead cops as a political pawn. Because if blue lives really matter to them, then they would have said something last week when in St. Joseph, Michigan, Larry Gordon, a white man, shot and killed 2 bailiffs. But nothing, did you even know this guy's name? Did you even know this guy's name? Do we know his background? Do we know his history? No. You know why? Because Larry Gordon being a white man is not politically expedient. They cannot use him as a tool against black people, against Black Lives Matter. Therefore, there's nothing to talk about. Put it away. If blue lives actually matter to them, then they would be talking about this issue with Larry Gordon just as much as they would about Dallas and Baton Rouge. But blue lives only matter to them to the extent that they can use them to silence Black Lives Matter. It has always been about stopping people who are seeking systemic change. Then what about white people? White people are killed more. More white people are killed than black people by police officers. Yeah, if you look at the raw numbers, but proportionately, black people, or black men in particular, 6% of the population and 40% of the people who are killed unarmed by the police officers. But let's talk about if all lives really mattered. We already know blue lives don't really matter to them. It's just a political ploy. But if all lives really mattered, why the hell aren't they out there protesting on behalf of Dylan Noble, a white man who was just killed by police officers in between the same time Alton Sterling and Philip Castile was killed, Philandro Castile was killed? That's because they don't matter. They have no problem. All lives don't matter to them. They have absolutely no problem allowing and standing by and watching this type of oppression be executed by police officers, even if it hurts their own community. But let anybody stand up against it, then all of a sudden these lives matter. No, white lives only matter to white people to the people who use this tactic, to the extent that they can be used to silence Black Lives Matter. And I tell you what, if you're so concerned about all of the white people who are killed by police officers, then instead of using them as a prop to silence us, let me know when you start your protest and we'll be there to stand in solidarity. Because you know why? We know that if they're going to kill somebody in your neighborhood, they're just as likely to kill somebody, if not more likely, to kill somebody in the black neighborhood. But again, it has been the same exact story throughout history. It's not about valid arguments. It's not about valid critiques. It's about using simple techniques to silence people who want a revolution, people who want to change the power structure, people who want to no longer be oppressed. So it's not about Black lives. It's not about blue lives mattering. It's not about all lives mattering. It's about whatever they can do to silence Black Lives Matter. So is Black Lives Matter a hate group? No more than Dr. King was a hate group. Is Black Lives Matter a hate group? No more than Martin Luther was responsible for all of the violence that ensued after he liberalized information. And the information source at that time happened to be a Bible. But people got a hold of information and made up their minds for themselves and decided we want to do something different. Last note, and I'm out of here. I've been thinking about, can we actually survive this new age of the democratization of the media, liberalization of information, the ability to access information at will, not only factual information, but biased information that confirms our biases? Are we able to actually survive this? Right? Are we in the same position as the peasants in the Reformation who are finally able to get information on their own terms, interpret that information on their own terms, and challenge the power structure based on their interpretation? Are we able to survive that? Because as you see, we are in a hyperpolarized society where everyone has information that confirms their own biases. Everyone has information that supports their own positions. And yet and still, we're not able to find common ground and resolutions, but we're in a divided society even more so. Can we survive? I mean, we talked about it before the show. I hope it doesn't require what it took after we had that liberalization of information in the Reformation. But I mean, 100 and some odd years, a war. You know, have we matured enough as a society to be able to grapple with this onslaught of information and to move forward without having to take 12 steps back, because now we have so much information that we're not able to handle and we have to fight each other? I don't know the answer to that. The only thing I can tell you is that time, you know, we're on this side of that flashpoint in world history where what was considered to be something horribly detrimental at the time and led to mass violence and revolutions at the time is such an important part of world history that now we have to look and say we're at a new flashpoint where we all have this type of access to any information that we need, and the interpretation is completely up to us, even if it simply confirms what we always believe. Can we handle that as a society? I don't know. I just hope it doesn't take as long as it took after the Reformation. Folks, we'll see you next time.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
It's Ben Dixon!
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.